The haunting case of Patrick Mullins' unsolved true crime mystery. Hook. Is Patrick Mullins still alive? Or did he fall victim to something far darker than anyone could have imagined? A chilling mystery that no one can explain, and a disappearance that still haunts the town. Stay with us till the end, because the truth is more terrifying than you think. Watch now, and unlock the shocking secrets of the strange case that no one saw coming. The night was cold. Too cold. Patrick Mullins could feel the chill bite through his jacket. He stood at the edge of the forest, staring into the dark trees. The wind howled around him, tugging at his clothes. But it wasn't the wind that made him uneasy. It was the silence. It was unnatural. Not a single animal sound. Not even the rustling of leaves. He took a slow step forward, eyes darting left and right. Something was watching him. He could feel it. The hairs on his neck stood up. A twig snapped behind him. He froze. The cold sweat on his palms made the grip on his flashlight slick. He turned around quickly. Nothing. The beam of light bounced off the trunks of the trees. Shadows stretched long, twisting into grotesque shapes. He heard it again. A soft shuffling sound, barely audible, coming from the deeper part of the woods. It wasn't an animal. It was too deliberate. Patrick's heart hammered in his chest. He didn't want to move, but his legs were already carrying him forward. A low whisper barely reached his ears. It was a voice. Faint. And it sounded like his name. Patrick. He stopped, breath catching in his throat. The voice was closer now. No. It was behind him. He spun around, the beam of his flashlight dancing wildly. Nothing. Just the trees, closing in. His feet shuffled faster now, the path ahead growing darker. Each step felt heavier. His body screamed at him to run. But there was something in the woods. Something that didn't want him to leave. He glanced back. A figure stood at the edge of the trees. Pale. Thin. Patrick's pulse raced. He couldn't move. The figure didn't blink. It didn't breathe. It just stared. A chill ran through him, colder than before. His breath caught in his throat. Something deep in his gut told him. This was no coincidence. This was planned. He was being hunted. He had no choice now. He turned and ran. His feet pounded the dirt path, but the woods felt endless. Every step was a struggle, like the earth was pulling him back. His breath came in ragged gasps, the cold air burning his lungs. But no matter how fast he ran, the figure was still there, behind him. Closer now. He dared a glance over his shoulder. The pale face, twisted in an unnatural grin, followed him. It wasn't just standing anymore. It was moving. Faster than a human should. Patrick's heart lurched in his chest. He pushed harder, faster, adrenaline flooding his body. The beam of his flashlight flickered, casting long shadows across the ground. The light sputtered again, then died. Darkness. The world around him became a black void. His feet faltered. He stumbled, nearly falling. The sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate, echoed behind him. It was getting closer. He couldn't outrun it. His breath quickened, the panic settling deep in his bones. He had to find shelter, somewhere to hide. The path split ahead, left or right? He didn't think. He veered left, hoping for cover. A small cabin appeared in the distance. Run. He didn't hesitate. The door was old, worn. His hands shook as he reached for the knob. It creaked open, the smell of mildew and rot filling his nostrils. Inside, it was dark. But it was safe. For now. Patrick slammed the door behind him. He leaned against it, trying to steady his breath. He listened. Nothing. For a moment, there was only the sound of his racing heartbeat. Then, he heard it. A tapping. Slow. Methodical. On the window. He turned toward it. The cabin was small, cramped, no escape. His pulse quickened again. He crept closer to the window, peering through the grime. Nothing. But the tapping. It was coming from the other side now. It wasn't a hand. It was something, clawing. Scratching. His skin crawled. He backed away slowly. The tapping grew louder. And then, it stopped. Complete silence. For a heartbeat, everything went still. Too still. The door groaned as something pressed against it. The figure from the woods. It was here. The door shuddered violently. A low, guttural growl rumbled from the other side. Patrick's breath caught in his throat. He backed into the far corner of the cabin. The walls felt closer now, as if they were closing in on him. His fingers brushed the rough surface of an old wooden chair, his body shaking. The growl came again, louder, angrier. A thud. And then another. Something, no, someone, was pushing against the door, trying to break through. Patrick's chest tightened. His thoughts raced. Should he try to escape through the window? No. Too risky. It would see him. He had no choice now but to wait. Wait for what? His mind screamed for him to move, to act, to survive. But the terror had frozen him in place. The door cracked. A splintering noise echoed in the small cabin. The air grew thick with tension. Then, just as quickly as it had begun, everything stopped. Silence. The growling was gone. The thudding stopped. Patrick's pulse throbbed in his ears. Was it over? He dared not move, not yet. His body was rigid, every muscle locked in fear. Another sound. A faint, wet scraping. Like nails dragging across wood. Patrick's stomach churned. The sound came closer. It was inside now. The air felt colder. A low whisper broke through the stillness. Patrick. His name, but twisted. The voice wasn't human. It was too distorted, too wrong. He couldn't breathe. His heart raced. It knows my name. The whisper was closer now. Too close. He couldn't take it anymore. He spun around, grabbing the chair behind him. With all his strength, he hurled it at the door. A crash. The chair splintered. It bought him only a moment. A long, drawn-out moment of silence. He rushed for the window, trembling hands grabbing at the frame. He threw it open. The night air hit his face like a slap. He could taste the cold on his tongue. But before he could climb through, a cold hand gripped his ankle. A sharp, agonizing pain shot up his leg. He screamed, pulling, kicking, but the hand was like iron. Another tug, and he was dragged back into the cabin. The window slammed shut. The door cracked open just wide enough to reveal a shadow. A face. Not human. Not anymore. It grinned, wide and hollow. Its eyes, black as pits, locked onto Patrick's. "Found you," it whispered. And in that moment, Patrick knew, he wasn't the hunter. He was the hunted. Patrick's mind raced. His heart thundered in his chest. The thing, whatever it was, yanked him back further into the cabin. His body hit the floor with a sickening thud. Pain shot through his back, but it wasn't the pain that kept him frozen. It was the feeling. The suffocating weight of something evil pressing down on him. The shadow moved closer. Its limbs twisted unnaturally, bending at angles that made Patrick's stomach churn. The cold hand that had gripped his ankle was now on his shoulder, dragging him to the center of the room. He gasped for air, but it felt like the room was closing in. The walls seemed to warp, stretching and pulsating with the thing's presence. Its breath was hot and foul on his skin, a rotten, decayed stench. His pulse pounded in his ears. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. The thing's face loomed over him, its empty eyes staring, unblinking, as if it was waiting for something. Patrick's mind scrambled for a way out. Think. But nothing made sense. The world was spinning, upside down. It leaned in, its jaw creaking as it opened wide, far too wide. A guttural hiss escaped from deep within its throat. Patrick could feel the darkness pressing against him. It wanted him. Needed him. He had no idea what it was or how it had found him, but he knew one thing: it wasn't going to let him go. It whispered again, its voice soft but sharp. Asterisk, you should have never come here, Patrick, asterisk. He shuddered. He needed to move. He needed to fight. His legs, his arms, felt like lead. But he could still feel the ground beneath him. The thing was close. Too close. A noise. A creaking from the corner of the cabin. A shadow. A flicker of movement. Patrick's heart skipped. It was the door. The wind howled again, this time louder than ever. And the door, creaking on its hinges, slowly began to open wider. Not by itself. Something, or someone, was pushing it from the outside. But who? His pulse raced even faster. The thing above him hissed again, this time in frustration. Its grip tightened on his wrist. The door opened wider. And then, a figure appeared in the doorway. Tall. Shadowed. A silhouette. For one brief moment, time seemed to freeze. Patrick couldn't breathe. The figure stepped forward, and the thing above him recoiled, a screeching sound filling the room. The figure was now in full view. A man. His face was unfamiliar, but there was something in his eyes. Determination. Fear. The thing snarled, but the man didn't flinch. With a quick motion, he pulled a long, silver knife from his belt. The blade gleamed under the moonlight. The creature hissed louder, its face twisting with rage. The man moved fast. Too fast. He lunged forward, driving the knife into the thing's chest. The creature screeched, a terrible, ear-splitting sound that rattled Patrick's bones. But it didn't die. It shrieked in fury. The man's expression turned grim. Asterisk, you don't understand, asterisk, the man muttered under his breath. Before Patrick could react, the creature twisted its body, breaking free from the man's grasp. It moved like a shadow, faster than Patrick could comprehend. With a single motion, the creature knocked the man aside, sending him crashing into the cabin's wall. The man lay motionless. The creature turned back to Patrick. Its grin was wide. Too wide. It leaned in, almost lovingly, its breath foul against his skin. Patrick gasped, heart racing. Then, just as the thing's cold fingers were about to touch his face, the ground beneath him shook. A low rumble. The door slammed open with a deafening crash. The figure, standing in the doorway, came back to life, pulling itself upright. "Get out," it shouted. Patrick didn't think. He ran. Patrick's legs moved before his brain could catch up. He bolted past the man, who was now struggling to his feet, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. The creature hissed, snapping at him, but Patrick was already out the door, into the night. The air hit his face like ice. His chest burned as he sucked in huge, desperate breaths. Behind him, the cabin door slammed shut with a violent crash. He didn't look back. His feet hit the dirt path, pounding the earth beneath him with every step. The woods were dark, too dark, but he didn't care. The only thing that mattered was getting away. The wind howled again, but this time, it carried something else. A voice. The whispering voice. Patrick. It was all around him, closing in like a vice. His stomach lurched. He could feel it. The thing. It was still out there. His breath came in ragged gasps, but he pushed forward, eyes focused on the distant tree line. Just get out of the woods. The trees seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction, as if the forest itself was alive, watching him, following him. The moonlight barely filtered through the canopy, casting long, twisted shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. His legs burned. His body screamed for him to stop. But the terror, pure, raw terror, kept him moving. He could hear it now, too. The footsteps behind him. Slow. Methodical. No longer a chase. More like a hunt. Each step Patrick took seemed to take him farther into the heart of the woods. His eyes darted around, searching for something, anything, to give him a sense of direction. There. A faint glimmer of light. A house? No, it couldn't be. But he ran toward it anyway. The light flickered again, brighter this time. It was real. The house loomed ahead, its porch light casting an eerie glow over the overgrown yard. Patrick's pulse quickened. It looked abandoned. But at this point, he didn't care. He needed shelter. Anything to stop the thing behind him from getting any closer. He reached the front door, slamming his fists against it. Bang. 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 No answer. Another scream in the distance, this one was human. A woman's voice. Patrick's blood ran cold. The door flew open with a creak. A woman stood there, her face pale and drawn. Her eyes wide with fear. She stepped aside without a word. Patrick didn't hesitate. He rushed in, slamming the door behind him. The woman backed away, watching him with a strange, unreadable look on her face. For a moment, there was only silence. The walls of the house felt solid, comforting, far from the nightmare outside. But then. A thud. A scratching sound on the door. It was there. The thing. The woman's eyes flickered to the door. Then to Patrick. "You shouldn't have come here," she whispered, her voice low and shaky. He turned to face her, confusion mounting in his chest. "Why? Why are you?" Before he could finish, the door behind him shook violently. The thing was trying to break in. The woman's face twisted, a look of terror and resignation settling in her features. "I tried to warn them," she whispered. Patrick's eyes widened in realization. "Warn them?" A soft voice, distorted, unnatural, whispered from the other side of the door. "I know you're in there, Patrick, *." The woman took a step back. "I couldn't stop it," she said, her voice barely a breath. Patrick turned to the door, panic rising in his throat. The creature wasn't done. It wasn't done. It would never be done. And now, it was inside. The door trembled again, this time with more force. A deep, guttural noise came from the other side, like the creature was trying to tear the door from its hinges. Patrick's eyes locked with the woman's. Fear mirrored in her eyes, but there was something else too, something dark, something knowing. Her hands trembled at her sides, and she looked away, toward the corner of the room. Patrick took a step back, his breath shallow, trying to piece it all together. The woman had let him in. But why? Why hadn't she tried to escape? The creature outside was relentless. The scratching grew louder. Closer. She turned her back to him, almost in defeat, and muttered something under her breath. Patrick couldn't catch all of it, but he heard one word. Run. Asterisk what? Asterisk, he gasped, his voice trembling. Asterisk what are you talking about? Asterisk. She didn't answer. Instead, she moved toward the back of the room, to an old, weathered cupboard. The wood creaked as she pulled it open, revealing a hidden trapdoor beneath the floorboards. Patrick's heart pounded harder. She was trying to hide from it. Asterisk get out of here, now, asterisk, she said, her voice now urgent. But Patrick couldn't just run. Not when she was still here. His eyes darted between her and the door. He could hear it now, its breath on the other side. Slow. Steady. Closer. The woman stepped aside, her face pale and resolute. Asterisk you won't survive if you stay here. It won't stop. It will take you, asterisk. Patrick's legs were shaking, but he couldn't move. Not yet. The door shuddered again, harder this time. A splintering crack. The thing was forcing its way through. What was it? Who was she? He needed to understand, but the time for answers was running out. The woman's eyes widened. The door splintered again, and with it came the unmistakable sound of something slithering. Something alive. Her voice grew low, almost pleading. Asterisk please, go, asterisk. Patrick had no choice. His mind screamed at him to run. To take the trapdoor. To leave this place. But as he turned toward the hidden escape, he saw it. The creature. Its form began to materialize through the cracks in the door, pale, slick skin that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Eyes wide. Unblinking. It grinned, its mouth far too wide. Patrick. The sound of his name, warped and twisted, made his blood run cold. The woman stepped back, her eyes hollow. Empty. I'm sorry, she whispered, but it wasn't to Patrick. It was to the creature. A low rumble came from the corner of the room, from the darkness. Suddenly, the trapdoor slammed shut. Patrick spun around in shock, eyes wide, breathless. What the hell? The woman had sealed him inside. Her face was a mask of sorrow as she stepped back into the shadows. No, Patrick whispered, heart pounding in his chest. Asterisk no, no, asterisk. She smiled faintly. But it wasn't a kind smile. It was something darker. The creature's presence grew stronger, the air turning colder, the room filled with its dreadful weight. The woman's form flickered in the darkness, disappearing like a shadow. And then, just as the thing lunged toward Patrick, everything went black. The last thing he heard was the woman's voice. Asterisk you were always meant to be here, Patrick, asterisk. A final whisper. A final breath. And then, silence. The silence was suffocating. Patrick couldn't breathe. The air was thick, heavy with the presence of something unnatural, something hungry. His heart thundered in his chest, every beat louder than the last. He stumbled back, his hands reaching out, but there was nothing to grab. The room around him seemed to close in, the walls pressing tighter with every passing second. Then, the whisper again. Asterisk Patrick, asterisk. The voice slithered through the darkness, curling around his name, making his skin crawl. He spun around, his mind on fire, searching for the source. But the woman was gone. The creature was closer. He could feel it. It was moving, stalking, its every step calculated, deliberate. His eyes flicked toward the door, now cracked open wide, but it wasn't an escape. Not anymore. There was no running. It had him. The air was so cold now. Too cold. His breath came out in visible clouds, each exhale a desperate cry for air. The creature's shape began to take form, shimmering in the darkness. The pale, slick skin. The wide, hollow eyes. That twisted, gaping grin. It was right in front of him now, looming like a nightmare made flesh. Patrick's mouth was dry. His legs felt like jelly, like they wouldn't hold him up much longer. It stepped closer, its breath foul, like decay and death. Asterisk, don't fight it, asterisk, the creature rasped. Its voice was low, distorted, almost melodic in its malice. The stench of rot filled his nostrils, making his stomach churn. Asterisk, you were chosen, Patrick, asterisk. He wanted to scream. He wanted to run. But there was nowhere to go. The walls felt like they were closing in on him. The shadows seemed to stretch and writhe, alive with the creature's energy. Patrick's pulse raced, a deafening beat in his ears. Asterisk, you belong here now, asterisk, the creature whispered. He couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. He needed to get out. Think, think, think. But the fear, the overwhelming, suffocating fear, made it hard to think at all. The creature leaned in closer, its grin widening. Patrick could feel its cold breath on his skin, could feel the darkness crawling into his very soul. Please. He whispered, barely audible, his voice shaking. Asterisk, please, no, asterisk. But the creature only laughed. It was a low, horrible sound, like something alive and dead all at once. It laughed, and Patrick's chest tightened as if his heart itself was being crushed. And then, just as the sound of its laughter reached its peak, a crack. The room shook. The walls groaned. The trapdoor under Patrick's feet burst open with a deafening crack. For a moment, time seemed to stop. And then the floor beneath him caved in. Patrick fell. Down. Down. Through the earth, through the dark void. The creature's laughter followed him, reverberating through the dark, endless tunnel. He fell, and the darkness swallowed him whole. There was no light. No sound. Just the suffocating grip of something wrong, pulling him deeper into the void. As he fell, he heard one last whisper, this time close to his ear. Asterisk, welcome home, Patrick, asterisk. And then, nothing. Silence. The kind of silence that comes only after a soul has been lost forever. The darkness was absolute. Patrick's body crashed to the ground with a sickening thud, but it didn't feel like the earth beneath him. It felt like nothing. His chest tightened as he gasped for air that wasn't there. The air was thick. Stale. Unnaturally heavy. He scrambled to push himself up, his hands sinking into something wet and cold. His fingers met a surface, but it wasn't solid. It was soft, like something pulsing beneath him. He tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't hold. His knees buckled, and he fell again, this time, his hands landing on something slick, almost like flesh. His stomach twisted. It was cold. The smell of rot. Decay. The air around him seemed to shimmer, like the very fabric of reality was warping. His head spun as he tried to make sense of where he was. He didn't recognize this place. The ground beneath him was soft but unyielding. The walls around him seemed to breathe, expanding, contracting in a rhythmic, eerie motion. Was he still alive? He reached out, feeling the slick surface beneath his fingertips. Flesh. It was everywhere. The sound of breathing echoed in the suffocating stillness. Low. Wet. Heavy. Like something enormous was waiting. Watching. Then, a voice, familiar, distorted, warped by the darkness, cut through the silence. Asterisk, Patrick, asterisk. His blood ran cold. It was the creature. It was here. And it was closer than before. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing in his ears, louder than anything he had ever heard. His breath came in shallow gasps as he forced himself to his feet. No escape. The walls felt like they were closing in around him, pulsating, breathing, alive, in ways he couldn't understand. He reached out again, desperately trying to find something solid, something to hold on to. His fingers brushed against something cold and smooth. A shape, a form. He traced it with trembling hands, long, curved, like a tendril. More flesh. More of it. His mind raced, panic tightening his chest, making it harder to think. The air was thick, like it was pressing on him, pushing him down. Another whisper. Closer now. Asterisk, you can't run from this, Patrick, asterisk. The voice wasn't just behind him. It was all around him. Everywhere. The darkness seemed to have a presence, a weight, a will of its own. Something was moving, just beyond the reach of his vision. He could feel it, asterisk here asterisk it, a slithering sound, something brushing against the walls of this place. He tried to turn, but his body felt heavy, as though it was being pulled down, sunk into the floor itself. It was the thing. The creature. It was closing in. He had to escape. But where? There was nowhere to go. Nothing but flesh. Nothing but the suffocating pull of the dark. And then, he felt it. A hand. Cold. Slick. Touching his shoulder. The breath on his neck. Hot. Foul. Asterisk were together now, Patrick, asterisk. His stomach dropped. He couldn't move. He couldn't speak. He couldn't do anything. The last thing he felt was the overwhelming pressure of the thing's presence. Its fingers gripping his shoulder, its cold breath on his skin. Then, asterisk nothing, asterisk. No sound. No light. Just the sensation of sinking deeper. Into the void. Into the flesh. Into the darkness. And as the last remnants of his consciousness flickered away, he heard one final whisper. Asterisk welcome home. Patrick, asterisk. And then, there was nothing left. The nothingness lingered. Time seemed to stretch, melt, distort around him. Patrick's mind was clouded, heavy, like a thick fog that refused to lift. But then, slowly, something pierced the veil. A flicker of awareness. A thought. A single, frantic realization. He wasn't dead. He wasn't gone. He could feel it, his body still existing, still tethered to something. Something wrong. The air was thick, still, but he could sense it. He could feel movement. It wasn't the pulsing walls. It wasn't the creature. It was something else. A shift. A tremor. As if the darkness itself was breathing. Patrick's eyes snapped open. But there was no light. No sky. No stars. He wasn't sure if he was standing or lying, or floating in between the two. His body was sore, aching as if every bone in his body had been twisted, pulled out of place. He could still feel it. The wetness. The flesh. It pressed against him, smothering him, clinging to his skin like something alive. His pulse thudded in his throat. Asterisk the thing had found him. It had taken him, asterisk. But this place, this dark, endless place, felt different now. Like it had changed. It had shifted. Patrick reached out blindly, his hands trembling. Fingers met the slick surface again. Cold. Alive. A shape, no, several shapes, brushed past him. Slithering. A soft, breathing hum filled the air, wrapping around him, pushing against his chest. A voice. The woman's voice. Asterisk, you shouldn't have come here, Patrick. Asterisk. The words echoed in his mind. The whispering voice. The thing. He tried to push himself up, but his legs refused to hold him. His mind spun, disoriented, dizzy with the pressure of whatever this place was. His hands grasped at the slick surface around him, and suddenly, he was moving. Dragged forward. The sensation of being pulled, dragged, grew stronger. No. Not dragged. Pulled. To something. A whisper. Closer, closer, The pulse around him intensified, like the very walls of this place were alive, breathing him in. He stumbled forward, his feet heavy, his body screaming for release. Closer, Patrick, He didn't know where the voice was coming from. It was everywhere. It surrounded him, pressing against his ears, his mind, suffocating him. Then, ahead of him, a flicker of light. A pulse. It was weak. Faint. Barely visible in the suffocating dark. But it was something. Patrick moved toward it instinctively, his feet stumbling through the fleshy surface. He couldn't see what he was stepping on, only that it was soft, yielding, like skin. The light grew stronger. Closer. And then, a shape. A door? No. It was a figure. A tall, slender silhouette, standing just beyond the dim glow. The figure was familiar. It was her. The woman. Her face was pale, but her eyes were empty. Hollow. She didn't speak. She just stood there, watching him. And then, the thing moved. From behind her. Emerging from the shadows. A massive shape. A writhing mass of tendrils, slick skin, and eyes, so many eyes. They were watching him. The creature. It was here. And it wasn't alone. More figures, shapes, shadows, eyes, began to emerge around the woman, surrounding him, closing in. Patrick felt the darkness pressing harder. The air was suffocating, cold, wet, and alive with the hum of the creature's presence. The woman tilted her head. You've come far, Patrick. Too far, Her voice was distant, as if she wasn't really speaking to him, but to something else. Something beyond her. Beyond all of them. Patrick's body tensed, panic rising like an explosion in his chest. The figure moved closer, the creature's breath brushing against his skin. And then, in the silence that followed, he heard it. A voice, deep and twisted, so far beyond anything human, echoed in his mind. You are ours now, Patrick, The ground beneath him began to shift, to warp, as the room closed in tighter, the walls pulling together. The darkness was consuming him. The creatures around him, they weren't alone. This place, this realm, wasn't just an in-between. It was the beginning of something far worse. And Patrick was at its center. As the last of his strength drained from him, he realized one terrible thing. The creature hadn't come for him. It had come with him. And now, there was nowhere to hide. Nowhere to run. The only thing left was to become. The darkness reached out, and Patrick's scream was swallowed whole. Forever. The darkness pressed in on Patrick, suffocating, all-encompassing. He had no escape, no refuge. He was trapped in the heart of it. The creature's eyes glowed, burning through the thick blackness. Their presence surrounded him, moving, circling. Watching. Waiting. Patrick felt the cold sweat on his skin, his heart pounding like a drum, his breaths coming in shallow gasps. Every fiber of his being screamed for release, for some way out of this nightmare. But there was none. You don't understand, the voice, distorted, rasped from somewhere in the shadows. It wasn't the woman's voice. This was something other. Something that couldn't be reasoned with. He tried to move, tried to force his legs to stand, but they wouldn't obey. His body was weak, drained, as if the very air had been sucked out of him. The ground beneath him wasn't solid anymore. It was soft, shifting, alive. Every time he tried to rise, it seemed to pull him back down, like the earth itself was consuming him. You were always meant to be here, the voice whispered again, but now it wasn't just the thing. It was the woman too, and something far older, darker, an ancient presence that made Patrick's blood run cold. The walls of the space around him pulsed, undulated like flesh, stretching and contracting. He could feel it, everything pressing in on him. The smell of rot, decay, mixed with something sweet, almost intoxicating. The creature reached out. Its long, gnarled fingers brushed his face, cold and slick, sending a wave of nausea through him. It's too late, it hissed. You belong to us now, He could see it now, its true form, towering above him. A grotesque amalgamation of limbs, eyes, and skin, twisting and writhing in ways that defied logic. Its voice, the voice spoke as if it was the entire dark space, echoing in his mind. Patrick's body trembled, but then something inside him sparked. A memory. A fragment. Something, real. A light in the distance. A figure. A chance. He gasped, finally able to speak. No. His voice was hoarse, ragged, but he fought through it. I won't become like you, The creature stopped. For a moment, the dark room fell silent. Then it laughed. A low, guttural sound that made Patrick's heart freeze in his chest. You cannot escape it, the creature whispered. But something shifted. The woman, the figure who had been silent until now, stepped forward from the shadows, her hollow eyes meeting his. She held out her hand. For the first time since he had arrived, Patrick felt a strange pull. A choice. He reached for her hand. But the moment his fingers brushed against hers, a violent shudder ripped through the darkness. A blinding flash of light. And then... nothing. Complete silence. The kind of silence that presses in on every thought. Every memory. Patrick's mind was blank. He stood alone. But the darkness had followed him. And as he felt the coldness begin to settle around him again, he realized, he hadn't escaped. He had become. And there was no turning back. The coldness that had once enveloped Patrick now seemed to merge with him. It wasn't a terrifying sensation anymore, but a part of him, his essence, becoming one with the shadows. The fear had dulled to a numb awareness. He couldn't recall the panic that had once surged through his chest. Instead, there was an unsettling calm. A peace, in its own way. Patrick didn't feel alive, not in the way he once did. But he didn't feel dead, either. He was, something else. Something new. Something bound to this place, this endless, pulsing void. Around him, the air was still thick with the weight of otherness. The walls of flesh, the slithering shapes, the hungry eyes. They were all gone. But the presence, the force that had taken him, lingered. And so did the voices. Soft. Whispering. He heard them now, clearer than ever. You are one of us, Patrick, It was the woman's voice again. But this time, it wasn't hollow. It wasn't empty. There was a soft warmth to it. Comfort, almost. He stood in the middle of a place where time no longer existed. A place where the laws of reality had bent and broken, and all that was left were fragments of what had been. But Patrick didn't need to understand it. He didn't need answers. The truth was now clear to him. There was no returning. No escaping. No redemption. Patrick had been chosen, yes. But it wasn't a punishment. Not in the way he had once feared. The darkness that surrounded him was a part of him. It always had been. He had simply been blind to it before. Blind to the fact that he had always been meant for this. And as his thoughts drifted into the quiet, he understood, this was home. The creature, the woman, the whispers, they were all part of a whole star. An ancient, forgotten force that stretched through the fabric of existence itself. And now, Patrick was a part of it. The weight that had once crushed him, the weight of fear, lifted. He was free. Free, at last, to become. The shadows wrapped around him, pulling him deeper into the quiet void, and for the first time since all of this began, he welcomed the peace. The silence. The home. And then, nothing. Forever.